Hi, I'm Emily and I'm 24 years old. My mother faked cancer for 3 years. Not a scare. Not a misdiagnosis. A full, detailed, calculated lie. And I was the one who paid for it. Emotionally. Financially. Every single way a daughter can pay for loving someone too much. By the time I found out the truth, I had already quit my job to take care of her. I had already drained my savings account. I had already stood in front of our entire family and begged them to donate to a GoFundMe for a woman who was never sick a day in her life. This is the story of how I found out. And this is the story of how I made her pay for every single tear she faked in front of me. Stay until the end, because the karma in this story is the kind you dream about. It started small, the way these things always do. I was 21, fresh out of university, full of plans. I had just landed my first real job, a marketing role at a company I'd interned with for a year. I was proud of myself. I remember calling my mom on the drive home, practically screaming with excitement. She didn't sound excited. She sounded tired. She said she hadn't been feeling well. Headaches, fatigue, dizzy spells that came out of nowhere. I told her to see a doctor. She said she would. 2 weeks later, she called me crying. She said the doctor found something. A shadow. On a scan. She said the word so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Cancer. I remember sitting in my car outside my new office, unable to breathe. My mother, who raised me alone after my father left when I was 6. My mother, who worked double shifts so I could have a normal childhood. My mother, who never once complained. She was dying. Or so I believed. I quit my job 3 weeks later. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would go back once she was stable. Once the treatment started working. Once things settled down. They never settled down. There was always a new complication. A new scam that looked worse than expected. A new specialist who wanted more tests. A new round of chemotherapy that left her too weak to get out of bed for days at a time. I became her full-time carer. I drove her to appointments that I now know never happened. I sat in waiting rooms reading old magazines while she disappeared behind doors marked staff only, telling me the treatment rooms were down a separate corridor where family wasn't allowed. I believed every word. Because why would my own mother lie about something like that? Here's where it gets worse. Stay with me. 6 months in, she told me the insurance wouldn't cover everything. The experimental treatment she needed wasn't approved yet. It was expensive. Tens of thousands of dollars expensive. She cried when she told me. She said she didn't want to be a burden. She said maybe it was time to stop fighting. I couldn't let her stop fighting. I set up a GoFundMe that night. I wrote a page full of the kind of details that make strangers open their wallets. Her diagnosis. Her prognosis. Her bravery. I attached a photo of her looking pale and thin, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa. A photo she asked me to take herself, saying she wanted people to see what she was going through. I shared it everywhere. Family group chats. Old school friends. Co-workers from my old job. My aunt shared it with her entire church congregation. Within a month, we had raised almost $40,000. I cried when I saw that number. I thought it was proof that people are good. That the world shows up when it matters. I didn't know yet that I was the only one being tested. And I was failing spectacularly. If you've made it this far, you already know something's coming. And trust me, it's worse than you think. For almost 2 years, I lived like this. My entire identity became the daughter taking care of her dying mother. I turned down a second job offer because I couldn't commit to full-time hours. I turned down a relationship because my boyfriend at the time said he felt like a stranger in his own relationship. Always second to a hospital schedule that never seemed to end. I let him walk away. I told myself it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except her. My mother, meanwhile, seemed to have good days more and more often. She said the new treatment was working. She started going out again. Lunches with friends. A weekend trip with her sister. I was happy for her. Genuinely, stupidly happy. I didn't think to ask why a woman undergoing aggressive chemotherapy had the energy for weekend trips while I was too exhausted to shower some days. I didn't think to ask a lot of things. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember the day exactly because it was raining, and I was picking up her prescription from the pharmacy on my way to her house, something I'd done 100 times before. The pharmacist looked confused when I gave her name. She typed for a while, frowned at the screen, and told me there was no prescription under that name. No record of any prescription. Not that month. Not ever. I told her she must be looking at the wrong system. She checked again. Nothing. I stood there in the pharmacy, rain dripping off my jacket, feeling something cold settle in my stomach for the first time. I told myself there was an explanation. There's always an explanation, right? Maybe it was filed under her maiden name. Maybe the doctor's office made a mistake. Maybe. That night I didn't sleep. 2 days later, I found the second crack. And this one, I couldn't explain away no matter how hard I tried. I was at her house, doing what I always did, tidying up while she rested. I went looking for a folder of medical paperwork to bring to an upcoming appointment. One she'd asked me to schedule for her, because she said she was too drained to make the call herself. I found the folder in her bedside drawer. Inside there were no medical records, no scan results, no treatment plans, just a stack of old receipts, a couple of expired coupons, and a printed photo I didn't recognize. A photo of my mother from a hospital bed, fur in her arm, oxygen tube under her nose, the exact photo she'd used for a GoFundMe update 6 months earlier. I looked closer. The date stamp in the corner of the photo was from 4 years earlier, long before her diagnosis, long before any of this began. I sat on the edge of her bed holding that photo, and I felt the entire last 2 years of my life rearrange itself in front of my eyes. I want you to imagine that feeling for a second. Not just betrayal. Something deeper. The realization that the foundation you built your entire adult life on was never real. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar, built on sand. I didn't confront her that day. I want to be honest with you about that. I was too much in shock to even form words. I put the photo back exactly where I found it, and I drove home in complete silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire way. That night, I started digging. Properly digging. I want to tell you something. When someone lies to you for years, your brain doesn't want to believe it, even when the evidence is staring you in the face. Part of me spent that entire week hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some explanation that made all of this make sense. There wasn't. I started with her phone records, which I had access to because I was the one paying the family plan bill. Another financial sacrifice I'd made without a second thought. I found calls to a number I didn't recognize. Long calls, sometimes twice a week, always around the time she claimed to be at treatment. I called the number myself, using a blocked line. A man answered. Friendly voice. Casual. He asked if this was Denise's daughter. And my entire body went cold, because I hadn't said a single word about who I was. I hung up. I sat with that for 2 days before I worked up the courage to call again. This time telling him the truth. I told him I was Denise's daughter, and I needed to understand what my mother had been doing for the last 2 years. He got quiet. Then he told me everything. His name was Robert. He wasn't a lover, which somehow made it worse in a strange way, because that would have at least been a human, understandable kind of betrayal. He was an old friend from an online support forum for cancer patients, a forum my mother had joined years earlier, not because she was sick, but because she liked the attention the sympathy brought her. She'd been doing this in smaller versions, long before I was even old enough to notice. Robert told me she used to talk about how good it felt to have people care about her for once. How her own life felt invisible, until people thought she was dying. He said he never suspected it was a lie. Not until recently, when he noticed her stories kept changing. Different hospitals. Different treatments. Details that didn't add up if you paid close enough attention. He apologized to me. A stranger, apologizing for something he didn't even fully understand yet. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark apartment for a long time. Here's the part that made my blood go cold. And it's the part that changed everything about what happened next. I went back through the GoFundMe. All the updates. All the comments. All the messages people had sent along with their donations. Messages from my aunt. From my old co-workers. from complete strangers who had read her story and felt compelled to give whatever they could, $10, $50, whatever they had. One message stopped me completely. A woman named Carol had written that she was donating in memory of her own mother, who had passed from the same type of cancer 2 years earlier. She said reading my mother's story helped her process her own grief. She donated $300. Money that, based on her profile, she clearly didn't have much of to spare. My mother had taken grief and turned it into a business model. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. By this point, something in me had gone completely still and cold. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done being sad. I was calculating. This is where the story turns. This is where I stopped being the girl who got fooled and became something else entirely. I didn't confront her right away. I want to explain why, because I think it's the most important decision I made in this entire story. If I confronted her immediately, she would do what she always did: cry, twist the story, make herself the victim of my misunderstanding. She was brilliant at that. She'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of making herself the center of sympathy in any room she walked into. I needed proof so complete, so undeniable, that there would be no room left for her to spin it. So I became patient. I became quiet. I became, in a strange way, exactly like her. Over the next 6 weeks, I built a file. A real one, unlike the fake one in her drawer. I got copies of the pharmacy records confirming no prescriptions were ever filled. I requested records from the 3 hospitals she claimed to have visited, and received confirmation, in writing, that she had never been a patient at any of them. I saved screenshots of her GoFundMe updates, cross-referenced against dates where I could prove, through receipts and location tags on old social media posts, that she was somewhere completely different, healthy and smiling. I found the original hospital photo she'd stolen. A quick reverse image search revealed it belonged to a woman from another country entirely, a woman who had documented her real cancer journey publicly years before mine even began, and who had no idea her most vulnerable moment had been stolen and repurposed to steal money from strangers. I reached out to that woman. I want you to sit with this for a second, because it's one of the moments that broke my heart the most. She was kind. She was gracious. She told me she'd fought and survived her illness, and that having her photo used this way felt like a violation she never expected. She gave me permission to use her statement as part of my proof. By the end of those 6 weeks, I had a folder that could destroy my mother's entire fabricated world in a single afternoon. But proof alone wasn't enough for me. I didn't just want her exposed. I wanted her to feel, even for a moment, the specific kind of humiliation and loss she had built her entire lie around avoiding. If you think you know where this is going, you're about to be surprised. Because I didn't do the obvious thing. I didn't post it online immediately. I didn't scream at her across the kitchen table. I did something slower. Something that, honestly, scared even me a little, because it meant becoming someone I never thought I'd have to become. I planned a family dinner. It was my aunt's 60th birthday, 3 weeks away. An event my mother had already been talking about for a month, mostly because it meant a captive audience for another round of her Brave Fight performance, complete with a scheduled moment where she planned to update everyone on her condition. I decided that update would happen, just not the way she expected. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I did something my mother taught me without ever meaning to. I learned to smile while holding a knife behind my back. I stayed close to her, helped her plan outfits for the party, even complimented how healthy she looked lately, watching her scramble internally to explain that away with some line about good days. I let her believe I still knew nothing. I quietly reached out to every single person who had donated to that GoFundMe. Not with accusations, not yet, but with a simple message asking them to attend the birthday dinner if they were free, telling them there would be an important update on my mother's health they'd want to hear in person. Almost everyone agreed to come. Grief and generosity make people show up, every time. I printed everything. The hospital denial letters. The pharmacy records. The stolen photo alongside its true, original source. Screenshots of dates that proved she was never where she claimed to be. I put it all into a folder, and I placed that folder in my bag the night of the party, sitting through appetizers and small talk with a calm I didn't know I had in me. My mother stood up around dessert, tapping her glass for attention, the same way she always did before one of her performances. She talked about her fight. She talked about her strength. She thanked everyone for their support, for their donations, for believing in her when things looked their darkest. She even, and I remember this detail perfectly because it was the final straw for me, she even paused for effect and let a single tear roll down her cheek before wiping it away with practiced grace. The room clapped. My aunt cried. Strangers who had given money they didn't really have looked at her like she was the bravest woman they'd ever met. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because it matters. I had spent 2 years being loud with worry, loud with fear, loud with love for a lie. This moment deserved silence and precision instead. I said, before everyone leaves tonight, I think you all deserve to actually know the truth about what your money paid for. The room went quiet in a way I'll never forget. I placed the folder on the table. I walked everyone through it, page by page, calmly, the way you'd present a business report, because in a strange way, that's exactly what it was. The pharmacy records with no prescriptions ever filled. The 3 hospital letters confirming she was never once a patient. The stolen photo, side by side with the real woman it belonged to, along with her written statement about how it felt to have her illness used this way. The dates. The receipts. The GoFundMe messages from strangers grieving their own mothers, giving money they could barely spare, to fund a lie. I watched my mother's face while I did it. I watched 30 years of performance crumble in real time, watched her go from confusion, to denial, to a kind of desperate anger I'd never seen directed at anyone but me before. She tried to interrupt. She said I was confused. She said I was jealous of the attention she got. She said terrible things, things I won't repeat here. Things that told me more about who she really was than any lie ever could. Nobody in that room believed her. Not anymore. My aunt was the first to speak. She stood up, looked at her sister, and asked one question. Did you take money from Carol? The woman whose mother died from actual cancer. My mother didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence answered for her. One by one, people started leaving the table. Not in dramatic fashion, no shouting, no scene. Just quiet, disgusted, disappointed exits, the kind that hurt far more than any argument could. My mother sat alone at the head of that table by the end of the night. The same table where she'd spent 2 years performing her greatest role. Now empty except for the folder of truth I'd left in front of her. I want to pause here and tell you something honestly. I thought I would feel triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt hollow. Exposing a lie doesn't undo the years it stole from you. But it does start something. It starts the process of taking your life back. That was the setup for everything that came after. And what came after was worse for her than anything I could have said at that table. Within a week, word had spread through every corner of our extended family and friend circle. My aunt, humiliated and furious on behalf of every honest person who donated, encouraged people to formally report the GoFundMe as fraudulent. The platform launched an investigation. My mother was required to either return the funds or face legal consequences for fraud, because unlike an ordinary lie, this one involved real money, moved under false pretenses, which crosses a very different legal line. She didn't have the money to return. Most of it had already been spent, not on treatment that never happened, but on things that made her life look the way she wanted it to look. New furniture, a car upgrade, trips with friends she took while telling me she was too weak to leave the house. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the detail that still makes my chest tighten even now. While I was drowning in debt from quitting my job to care for her. While I was skipping meals some weeks to cover her rent because I believed every cent mattered to her survival. She was living comfortably off strangers' grief and my devotion. Carol, the woman who donated in memory of her own mother, ended up speaking to a local reporter after hearing what had happened. Not out of a desire for revenge, but because she wanted other people to be able to spot the signs she hadn't been able to see. The story spread further than any of us expected. My mother's name, face, and fabricated GoFundMe story became a cautionary headline online, shared as a warning about charity fraud. She lost friends who had known her for decades. She lost the sympathy she had spent years cultivating, replaced instead by a permanent, well-documented reputation as someone who fakes cancer for money and attention. In a small community like ours, that kind of reputation doesn't fade quietly. It follows you into every room you walk into for years. Legally, she avoided prison, mostly because she agreed to a repayment plan that will take her most of the next decade to complete, garnished directly from what little income she manages to earn now, since most local employers recognized her name the moment it crossed their desk. I moved out of her orbit completely after that dinner. I went no contact, something I know some people struggle to understand, especially when it comes to a parent, but I want to say this clearly for anyone listening who's been in a similar situation. You do not owe endless forgiveness to someone who built years of your life on a lie designed to drain you. I rebuilt slowly. I went back to work, starting over in a junior role because 2 years off had erased my old seniority, but starting over honestly felt better than staying trapped in someone else's fiction. I found a small apartment of my own, quiet, simple, entirely mine. I started therapy, which I probably should have started the week I found that photo in her drawer instead of months later. I learned slowly how to trust my own instincts again, after years of being taught to distrust them in favor of someone else's performance. The last time I heard anything about my mother, she was working part-time at a call center 2 towns over, still paying back a debt that will follow her for years, still, according to my aunt, telling anyone who'll listen that she's the real victim in all of this. Some people never learn. Some people simply run out of audience. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Love makes us generous. It makes us trusting. It makes us give people the benefit of the doubt, again and again, even when small cracks start to show. That's not a flaw in you. That's a strength. But strength without boundaries becomes a weapon someone else can use against you. Pay attention to the cracks. Not with paranoia, but with honesty. If something doesn't add up, it's allowed to not add up. You're allowed to ask questions, even of the people you love the most, especially of the people you love the most, because real love survives honest questions. Only lies fall apart under them. I don't regret loving my mother the way I did. I regret not trusting myself sooner. If this story moved you, if any part of it reminded you of a lie you've lived through, or a boundary you finally had the courage to set, I want to hear about it. Write it in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is realize we're not the only one who's been through something like this. And if you believe someone deserves to hear this story too, someone who's currently pouring themselves into a lie without knowing it yet, share this video with them. You never know whose eyes it might open. Subscribe for more stories like this one, real experiences, real consequences, real karma. Because the truth always finds its way to the surface eventually. It just takes someone brave enough to dig for it. I'm Emily. And this was my story.